Hello and welcome to another webinar from Actio. Today we're going to talk about harnessing ISO 31000 and technology for risk management excellence, right? For whoever this is the first time that's participating in one of our webinars, Actio sponsors these webinars. Actio is a software company that provides a platform to manage corporate management methodologies, right? Like risk management, strategy execution, performance management, and people assessment, and so on. And this event is also sponsored by ERM Exchange, enterprise risk management consulting from the USA, right? Um, just some housekeeping before we get started. The dynamic of the event today will be a talk between myself and our and John McLaughlin, a 30-year consulting experience in ERM professional. So thank you, John, for participating and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to start with our questions and answers back and forth, and it's a lot more of a open talk than a structured talk, right? But we are reserving at least 10 minutes by the end to answer your questions. So for you to collaborate with us and put up your questions and comments, please do so in the chat, right? So feel free to use the chat to comment or ask questions. We're going to be monitoring the chat. And there is also a link to Slido. Slido is a place where you can put up your questions and other people can like it. And the questions that have the more likes will go up and will be the first ones that we're going to answer. So feel free to do either way. Put here in the chat or click on the link for Slido, which you will find on the comments section, on the chat, sorry. Either way, we will access your comments. We'll try to answer some questions throughout the event, but reserving 10 minutes by the end. A common question we have is if the event is recorded. It is, right? So we're going to be recording the event and sending out by tomorrow an email to all of you with the link of the event. If you want to share with someone, or if you're not able to stay for the full event and want to see the end, anyways, it's a recording you will have access to. And also, we can emit a certificate of attendance for whoever wishes to receive those. There's a link also on the chat where you will be able to fill in your information so that we can send you a certificate of attendance. And if you want to make contact directly with us, feel free to do so. Our contacts are also in the chat. Both John and I will be glad to interact with you further, more outside of the webinar, right?
Correct.
Well, John, first, thank you very much. I know you have a very busy schedule, and setting aside a time to talk to us and share your experience in ERM is of great value for us, and I'm sure for everybody that is watching us as well. I'd like to begin with a very broad question. Frameworks like ISO 31000 or COSO all are directed to reducing risks, right, and managing risks. And they exist because risks exist and because risks impact companies' performances and lives in all sorts of ways, right? So why do risks come true? Why do risks happen? and if risky events come true?
A very broad question, right? So
Okay.
it's almost like the nature of humankind is why do bad things happen? And there's no shortage of human nature in this world, nor will there ever be, right? But bad things do happen, and they continue to happen. And you know, I point back to a book actually that was written by a professor named Mark Abkowitz, and the book starts out with, why do bad things happen? And basically, he points to the same thing in being we're human beings and bad things happen. And by the way, there is the upside of risk in terms of not taking advantage of certain situations and opportunities. But we're talking about more about bad things that happen, the downside of risk.
Mm.
And Mark Abkowitz's book went into catastrophes. As you said, bad events affect in organizations, affect many people. He pointed to catastrophes where essentially people died in most of these case studies. And he took about 18 different case studies over a multiple year period. And this book had been produced maybe about 15 years ago or so. So we aren't back in time. But what's interesting about this book, and when I came upon the book, is that these factors, and I'll tell you about these factors in a moment, can be applied to things that are happening now. And such as, with Boeing, and maybe we can go into Boeing a little bit, in terms of what's happening in that organization. But I'd like to share those factors with you, if you don't mind. And so I think we have a slide that could be brought up. Antonio, maybe you could help us with that slide, and I'll clear my throat.
Yeah.
So there's 10 risk factors. And again, Mark Abkowitz took 15 or 18 different events and said, there's a common thread to why these bad things happen. So why do risks occur? Is the first one, though, is design and construction flaws. And most things, buildings, airplanes, space capsules, bridges, tunnels, are built to withstand forces. And so if you don't build it properly, the structure, the thing, the space capsule, the airplane, is prone to failure. And it also, he points out to the fact that faulty components may lead to design and construction flaws, as well as not assembling things properly. So design and construction flaws was the first. The second is deferred maintenance. And the big question for companies, okay, particularly a public company, is do you continuously operate or do you shut down? So you can think about maybe a nuclear plant, is that it does have to shut down for periods of time, where you reassemble the uranium within a power plant. But that is going to cost your shareholders and your organization. So the question is, do we continuously operate or do we shut down? Because, procrastination comes into effect because we're human beings when nothing's going wrong, when nothing is malfunctioning. So this deferred maintenance is definitely a factor that has occurred in these catastrophes that have happened. And it's not just one deferred maintenance item. It might be really multiple component failures that really lead to the decline in deferred maintenance and ultimately some catastrophe. The third is economic pressures and limited funding, tight budgets, strict cost-cutting measures. Look, I don't know an organization, for-profit or not-for-profit, that doesn't have those challenges with it. But things like shoddy workmanship or lower quality materials, eliminating backups, these are things that are prevalent in organizations that are under some stress with economic pressures. And the fourth is scheduling constraints. And Abkowitz even talked about the fact that the economic pressures and scheduling constraints kind of go hand in glove. But this is with scheduling constraints, it's more about eliminating important details, performing parallel tasks versus sequential tasks. And he's an engineer, and he's talking about projects that were put in place and that they, in order to enhance the timeliness of delivery of the product, of the structure, is they perform parallel tasks. And there were problems with performing tasks in a parallel sequence or parallel versus in a sequential manner. And inadequate training, because let's face it, training is just not viewed as necessarily being productive. But inadequate training in certain things will definitely contribute to mistakes. So he's pointing to training as being the fifth risk factor. You can change the slide to the next. So not following procedures, again, we're human beings. And so repetitive activities at a place like, say, a nuclear plant or a chemical plant give way to complacency with the workforce. And people deviating from strict protocols, neglect or even invention of new tasks to perform a task that was well thought out, but people think, well, I can cut some corners here to accomplish the same goal. But cutting corners sometimes ignores important procedures. And just assuming that others are following protocols can be dangerous as well. The seventh is the lack of planning and preparedness. And Mark Abkowitz in his book talks about the fact that when a catastrophe occurred, even though there might have been some planning, is that not enough forethought was given to the variety of scenarios or the magnitude of the problem and alternatives that should have been thought about before the catastrophe occurred. And updating those on a frequent basis, or at least a practically frequent basis. The eighth is the communication failure. And whether that's within a company or department or across an organization or across organizations, is that just communication breakdowns occur. Again, because we're subject to human nature, it's just what we are. And also communication breakdowns to the public. When Abkowitz was looking at communication, is this one risk factor was present in just about every one of those case studies he evaluated. And I can tell you, as I apply these risk factors to current news, they're present in many of these current catastrophes. And the last two, the arrogance and political agendas, were something that he wasn't really thinking about when he came up with the topic or this idea of these 10 risk factors or 8 risk factors, is that arrogance and political agendas were clearly present as well. And arrogance being overconfidence with either an individual or even the organization itself, where individuals, let's say at the top, are driven to succeed with, really without sufficient regard to others. And cultivating this culture of a fear of reprisal for people who complain. And hopefully we talk about Boeing and these whistleblowers and not being listened to. But it's the idea of like, I can handle anything. We can get through this. But that's a dangerous thing, and that leads to arrogance. And so there's individual and corporate arrogance that can be present. And then the last is just the political agendas. And let's face it, you put two people in a cubicle, life becomes political. But you take that, that micro level and produce a macro level, is the politics gets more complicated. And so what he had pointed out in his book as well with these case studies was, is developing countries, for instance, seeking some elevated status, or even a company that's a growing company seeking some elevated status will make compromises, and he believes that they're present in these political agendas, and, leading to things like relaxed safety standards, where one country will accept the relaxed safety standards, whereas another country would not, given its heavy regulatory presence. So why do risks happen? Is that I think these factors will show you that we're human beings and risks will continue to occur because of just, the limits of human beings and how they operate. But I like to point to these factors as ways for an organization to place it into its mentality, so that everyone within the organization, not just the top executive team, not just middle management, but people at the lower layers, can understand these factors and apply them in their jobs. And then putting in place mechanisms to help communicate not just one factor, but multiple factors, so that an organization can manage those risks and avoid those bad things from happening.
Yeah. So these 10 factors are pretty exhaustive for, I imagine, the operational risk level, which is pretty much addressed fully by the ISO 31000, right? Direct or indirectly. I mean, some of these factors may be indirectly addressed, like arrogance or political risk. I mean, if you have ISO implemented, they will mitigate these factors in the chance of it happening, right? Even though you may have arrogance or political agendas, if the ISO is, if the framework is implemented, it'll reduce potential risk of it coming true, right? Does that make sense?
Well, the framework, right? The ISO framework, and also like the COSO framework, and they're both different, and I think they both have definitely some beauty to both of them. But it's a conceptual framework, and so how an organization is going to execute and put in place this conceptual framework um, is helpful. But my belief is that it doesn't go far enough, and that the practicality of these risk factors is something that can be embedded in the framework. And then more precisely, in that risk management diagram that you see in the ISO 31000 framework is evaluating risks. But during that risk evaluation process is taking into account, like, where have been our communication problems? Where are our economic constraints? Where are there training deficits? And so, what I do when going through with an organization and identifying risks is to make this real with a company. Is we'll take certain recent events that have occurred within the company that the public wouldn't know, and evaluate those events as case studies for the organization, because the people within the organization may have been directly involved with that, and the application of risk factors makes it more real for them in evaluating that. So just to add, the ISO 31000 framework, well thought out, the COSO framework, well thought out, but bringing in something from another vector with these 10 risk factors, I think really helps to enhance the process.
Yeah, we have a question here in the chat as well that I think is interesting. Um, do you define risk as only the negative part of effect of uncertainty on objectives from ISO 31000? This question comes because beyond the 10 risk factors, there are no factors linked to positive side of uncertainty.
Well, two thoughts come to mind. This book with Mark Apkowitz, I think there were 15 catastrophes there was something bad that happened. There were 3 that he pointed out that the catastrophe could have been a lot worse had it not been for some luck. And so the catastrophe still occurred, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. And so he talks about luck in there. And really what he's saying is, in one situation was an airliner, and there happened to be a pilot who was actually just a passenger on board that helped to identify a solution to the flight crew. And there were only 2 people on the flight crew at the time, so, or maybe there were 3, but 4 heads are better than 3, and 3 heads are better than 2. And so, in helping to solve a problem. Yeah, what's interesting too, the second part was this, is that when I went through this recently with a life sciences company, is that the upside of risk is that one of the operations officers said, even though I didn't get the approval to buy this certain software to help us resolve a situation, he said, I went ahead and I bought it anyway. And I can't recall it precisely, but I think the investment was maybe $10,000 US. Mm-hmm. And about a year afterward, there was something that happened. And his point was that it saved that company like a multiple of like 80 times what the investment was. So, $800,000 or something like that. And I guess it was in fines and penalties or some compliance issues. Is that his point was, we have to be evaluating these risks from an upside potential too, and making investments in order to grasp an opportunity uh, or to get a greater return on a particular area or a particular product. So
Yeah.
I think the factors focus on catastrophe, but to the question here is that yes, there has to be an evaluation of the upside as well to not doing
Okay.
something.
So the definition of risk is broader than just the negative side, but these particular factors, they came up from the study of catastrophes, so they will naturally be like focused on the negative side of risk, right? Okay. I'd like to broaden a little bit our uh, assessment of risk from, operational to other factors. For example, um, why do organizations many times don't have a good enterprise risk management process or a structure, right? So, already coming in with one of the possible answers is it's hard to get buy-in from the top, right? So that is implicit in like the factors that you showed us operational for operational risks, but many times it's a reason why these factors happen, right? Can you elaborate a little bit on that, on the element of having top management buy-in to risk management?
Sure, sure. So there have been a few instances where I've been approached by a chief compliance officer and they've said, we really need enterprise risk management. And we'll talk about the CEO, and it will become fairly quickly apparent that the CEO is not bought in.
Mhm.
And um, and why is the CEO not bought in? Well, they question the investment of time, the investment of money, and they question, what is the immediate return on this enterprise risk management project that we'll undertake. The other thing too is that, and you have to, by the way, so you have to convince that CEO. But CEOs are tough. I mean, they're hard-charging individuals. They have very definitive ideas on what they want to execute, and so if you can't penetrate that CEO's thinking, is that this program probably won't go very far. The other dynamic too is that there are boards and surveys over the past 10 or 15 years are consistent in saying that boards are still looking for more information about risk management. And yet they're not getting it because these surveys, again, they're every year, it's like roughly 2/3 are saying we're not getting enough information about risk management. And it's higher in the nonprofit sector for whatever reason, is that you may have this demand by the board, but if the CEO is not bought in because of those things that I mentioned about the
Yeah.
skepticism of time and energy and money and what is the return, is that you have to get that buy-in from the top.
So this is a point where technology can actually help a lot because, well, ISO frameworks or COSO or other frameworks that you may use, like the operational side of it, it's pretty obvious how technology can help, audit the process, run the process, and give visibility to what's going on and where. But the top management buy-in, um, it's also a point where technology can deliver by giving transparency and translating risk into financial numbers, right? And putting risk into a scale. That is the language that CEOs and top management speak, right? So it's hard to say, oh, you're reducing risk. Okay, but what's the financial impact? What's the financial gain expected from this risk reduction? So with technology, with software, you can say, hey, your inherent risk exposes you to $10 million of risk on the next 1 or 2 years. With these practices implemented, your residual risk is $3 million. So you are actually saving potential $7 million. So you translate in money, in how the CEOs and C-level communicate with the board results, you put risk into that language, and therefore you make it easier for for them to buy into the program and to report, results that risk management brought, right? Like the one you just brought as the example. Someone spent $10,000 even though they weren't didn't get approval for it, but then it came back 80-fold, right? Those $10,000. Um, so how do we show this? Because that's how you get top management to support the process and the initiative, right? And technology can help translate all of the operational risks and other types of risks as well as, you know, uh, initial exposure and residual exposure to these risks, and adding them all up, you can have like one number you easily communicate. Say, hey, this process to have ERM in our company costs X, but it reduces exposure from Z to Y, you know.
Mhm.
And the sell is a lot easier when we speak their language, right?
Just as adding to
And
that,
yeah,
speaking their languages, most CEOs will say, "Give me the business case," and what you're just describing there, Guillermo, is the business case and making that business case tangible to the
yeah,
CEO.
yeah, exactly. And that's where, software can support that. And we talked a lot about communication, right? It's one of the points one of the factors, right, you brought to us. And on the last point on top management, buy-in, communication is of the essence, right? What other aspects of communication uh, impacts, risk management and why risks happen?
So, adding to the point that Mark Abkowitz made is that there has to be a healthy debate and a discussion of, that takes time about risks. And, I think, again, as human beings, is that we shortchange the communication and how much time it takes to debate and have discourse around risks and what could happen, and collaborating as well across functions about, an issue with one particular component may not be an issue with another, but once that other component understands what the one component is facing, there becomes this cultivated thinking about risk management and how does my component uh, translate into value within the entire organization. And that's why, as part of these exercises that we go through, is that we have cross-functional teams, cross-departmental teams that are debating their issues and helping to share that information. Um, and so it takes time, and that's why communication is a problem, because you need to put the time and energy into this to make sure that you're getting these ideas across the organization.
Yeah. Tying in to that latest comment that you just made, there's a comment here on the chat from Roy, saying that he has similar experience in my healthcare journey leaders. Sorry, my healthcare care journey. Leaders are still interested and invested on quality improvement activities, but risk management remains a no-go zone. Leadership tends to have an intuitive approach rather than a comprehensive one. So that's the point of communication, right? I mean, on top of what John just said, you have to talk their talk, right? For you to have their buy-in. So if you can translate and make it obvious, the impacts and the gains, then slowly they will have this buy-in. Let me go a little bit off script and show you an example, right, of how you can communicate this with top leadership. I'm gonna share my screen with you. Okay, so I'm at our software. This is our strategy management software and performance management software. So it's not the risk management software. So this is what top leadership are looking at, right, on their day-to-day. The strategic map, the objectives, the goals, the projects, and each one of these elements, right, be it an objective, a KPI, or so on, they are looking into this on their board meetings, where many times they don't go into this level of detail for risk. But if you have plugged in the risks with these KPIs, with these results that they monitor and are engaged with, you start talking their language, right? So they are looking at, for example, an objective called add value to shareholder. And this objective has two KPIs, EBITDA margin and EBITDA, and strategic initiatives here. And they're not reaching their goals in EBITDA, so you can drill down and understand what's happening, OpEx, expense, revenue. All of this is their language, the language that C-level talk, right? But here, I have a risk connected to EBITDA. So this connection draws their attention to risk management. So what's going on? Why aren't the controls for this risk being executed on time? What's the residual risk? How is the mitigation plan for this risk going? So you put risk integrated with their standard agenda, with their standard way of communicating and talking to each other, right? Using technology. So you integrate risk management process and communication with their communication and processes. So I'm just trying to exemplify this communication issue, and going back to the comment, right, that Roy made here about leadership not treating as an intuitive approach rather than a comprehensive one. So it should be comprehensive, right? It should be clearly communicated and integrated in the reports that they are interested in, and talking the language that they talk, right?
Just adding to that, there was a blurb that I saw in the news yesterday or the day before about diplomacy, and ultimately it was the point to be made was that you have to speak the language of the other individual. And so as you're sharing that, Guilherme, I'm thinking, a chief risk officer doesn't necessarily have the language to convey this thinking that the CEO is thinking, or that other top officials of an organization are thinking. So you have to speak their language. And those values that you were sharing on the screen are something that would really resonate with them. And linking, enterprise risk management with their language is essential, which just goes along with what we're talking about with communication.
Yeah. I'm going to read also a comment here from the chat that is reinforcing this point, from David Sapp. Relying only on intuitive approach likely does not put an organization in a reasonably defendable position in case of a claim or unhappy board. A lack of organized and considered mitigations prevents a team from being properly armed to proactively respond to an issue. Right? So we shouldn't be relying only on intuition, right? An intuitive approach.
Well, and the question is, whose intuition?
Yeah.
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 So one person,
Exactly.
that's that. I mean, maybe that can corresponds with arrogance as well. Is it the CEO's intuition, the executive team's intuition? Is it the intuition of the entire organization?
Yeah. Another point I wanted to touch with you, John, is about capacity, capacity of the team, right? And the structure that makes enterprise risk management happen in companies. How do you see that as a factor or integrated with both the frameworks we that exist, ISO 31000, and how could technology also contribute to this issue, right?
Well, it seems to me that every organization I'm serving, and not just with enterprise risk management, but with other compliance managers, and I'm talking really from the state's perspective with the SEC and financial reporting and technology compliance, is that, I mean, every organization I'm serving is under some kind of stress. Time limitations, capacity. I think you may have used the word capacity, but with time, energy, and money, is that we don't have the budget, we don't have the time, we have other initiatives in place. We just don't have the energy for enterprise risk management, which is creating this obstacle to putting in place an effective program, or at least re-energizing the current program. And so, because these organizations have like system initiatives and they have their customers to contend with, and it's becoming a more intense environment with competitors, with vendors themselves and third-party risk management. There was a question in there earlier about I guess it was up chain, supply chain, or is that this vendor risk management is something that's taking a fair amount of time from a supply chain standpoint, but also from a technology and security and privacy standpoint. Empowering employees and compliance efforts is that everybody seems to be under constraint, and so how are we going to free up time and money and energy in order to be able to place it into enterprise risk management? Because I think we see the benefits of that, but not necessarily the CEO or other senior executives see the benefits of that.
Yeah. And technology can also help that, making people more productive, right? So I imagine a process that I call like first generation ERM, right? That is manual. It's emails being sent back and forth and PowerPoint presentations or reports being built every single time from scratch, and the monitoring of mitigation plans. You have to call up people. Oh, is this done? Is this not done? And the midnight oil burning to get the reports ready to, to present on the next day for the board, and that kind of dynamic is very time consuming and man hour consuming, right? Once you bring in technology to support the process, you can streamline the process very much and save people's time and fit better within available resources, right? With the budget that you have or the team that you have to make that process run. So it is as you said, a reality in every company that there is constraint, right? There is budget constraint, resource constraint. So you have to extract the most you can from what you have available, right? And technology, especially when we talk about like AI in ERMs, it can save a lot of time for people that are executing the process, right? Because uh, deploying the risk management throughout the organization and getting it to the front line of business requires a lot of dedication. We have companies with tens of thousands of employees, and how do you get the message down there? How do you teach, the frontline manager to manage risks? Because his business is, I don't know, producing something, selling something, marketing something, right? And he has to do that, also managing risks. So it's not the first thing he's thinking about. So how can we leverage technology to make that happen with the constraints that exist, right? Uh, what have you seen, John, lately about, AI applied to risk management, to enterprise risk management? And I can also
Well, I
talk a
definitely
little
want to
bit
hear.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear about that too. Is that you and I had a conversation probably a year ago about AI and how AI is impacting the business environment and how AI will be used in enterprise risk management. And a year ago, well, the adoption of AI has been like a wildfire. In terms of its speed, you look back to the adoption of the internet, the adoption of email, and the adoption of different technologies is that uh, it's closing in terms of like the speed of this. So, as you mentioned about the use of technology, is that I mean, there's an opportunity with AI, and that you have to identify those opportunities. I recently sat in on a discussion with several people, several consultants, and a couple CEOs and CFOs, and we were all talking about AI, and the point that the CEOs and the CFOs were making is, yeah, we see the opportunity. We're concerned about our competitors and what they're using around AI. We want to be a step ahead of them. We know our customers expect it. We know our shareholders expect, operational results and efficiencies in our business. Is that our challenge right now is finding the right spot. Is that we could use AI across the organization. Is that where are the best opportunities and the best returns for what we need to do as it relates to AI? And that might be, like customer interaction systems, or maybe it's in, and maybe this is where you can layer in here, is these, like I'll call it like predictive analytics. But analytics in terms of like, how do we apply AI in enterprise risk management to foresee the future here? Um, and obviously operational optimization, whether it be in repetitive tasks and making them less personal, uh,
Mhm.
but really enhancing the decision making within an organization. And so the conundrum is like, we're not sure where best to apply AI. And so I know that you have an opinion about AI as it relates to enterprise risk management. Um,
Mhm.
and so, but that's what the thinking seems to be right now.
Yeah. I think AI is very broad, right? And we can have many applications of AI within ERM. Some are more mature and ready to be, to deliver value. And some are, in my perception, still, uh, you know, getting there, getting maturity to be able to deliver real value, right? For example, risk assessment, uh, using AI to assess risks is something that makes sense, right? Um, but unless you're willing to dedicate quite some time and resources to create an algorithm, specifically for your reality, it it won't really work in the generic form. Like you don't get something from market ready for your business, just plug in and it's ready. You would have to, create your own algorithm for each risk. So it does make sense, but it's still the resource you're going to put in compared to what it's going to be able to output from this process. I still have questions if it's ready for market, um, unless you have very specific and high risks that you have to control. And maybe for one or two risks within your corporation, it's worth doing that, but not as a generic, we're going to apply AI to do risk assessment on all of our risks, right? But there are other areas within AI, like the generative AI, that can help a lot in summarizing information for executives, for example, right? So AI is able to read and interpret at a much higher speed than a human being and try to or summarize what's going on and what's relevant for the executive to look at, and also be the AI be a guide or like a local risk consultant for every user in a software, for example. So a guide for that user on what they should do, like how they should conduct a cause analysis. The AI could be helping them in doing that. And for those applications, I think they're very ready and able to deliver real value. Um, let me just check the time. We have 10 more minutes. I think we can pull some of the questions here um, in the comments. So still on AI, uh, AI can be a tool to do risk management, right? To help you do risk management and increase productivity of your team. But in itself, it's also a new risk, right, for the company. So the question here is, how can organizations address issues related to data quality, AI biases, and algorithmic transparency? So these are some issues and risks that companies that are using AI in their operations, in not only their operations, but in customer um, connections, communication, even in marketing, it can affect significantly the company if some of these biases or the algorithms that we don't know exactly how they work come up with responses that makes no sense, right? So what are the new risks that you've been seeing in the companies that you support related to AI, John?
So I'm glad that individual brought up that question about data quality. Is that in the conversation I had, the discussion I had with the consultants and the CEOs and CFOs, is that one of the issues that they're contending with is, all right, so we're going to commit ourselves to this particular area as it relates to AI and the business transformation effort that goes a part of that, is that the initial hurdle, or what they described as a wall, was the data that we have is still not good enough. Is that there has to be an effort to go in and actually call it cleanse that data. And it may be as well as combining data from different data sets in order to make this business transformation effort worthwhile. And so the investment of time, energy, and money in just making sure that that data is good, or good enough for the business transformation initiative, whatever it might be, is essential to getting started, right? Um, the AI bias, I don't think it came up in our conversation. I mean, we all recognize that there is clearly AI bias. It's as good as the questions you place in there and the information you're getting out. Um, I think people recognize that there is clearly a risk with that. Um, I'm not sure I can really add much to that. The fact that it is a risk, and the same thing with the algorithms. Like, who knows with some of these algorithms as to how they're operating? Is that there has to be a fair amount of skepticism as well as to. I mean, you should employ a healthy skepticism in terms of what you're getting in return for what you're placing into, like ChatGPT, as a for instance.
Yeah. We have many other questions here. There's questions and answers. Someone put a question there as well, and we have a couple of questions here um, in Slido. I'll pull. We still have 5 minutes, so um, how do you prioritize risks? What is more important, greatest impact or likelihood of occurrence? That's a question here in Slido.
Well, when I go through this process with a management team, is that we'll identify risks, we'll come up with mitigating activities to reduce the risks. That's where we get into, we were talking earlier about money and time, is that, and CEOs, is the best idea wins. And so, that influences the allocation of capital. Is that, but the debate around, what is the likelihood and what is the perceived impact, is that has a great bearing on priority, right? And so those issues that have the greatest priority, but also taking into account, well, what is it going to cost for us to mitigate that risk, um, is somewhat of an intuitive process. Data always helps, but the intuition of the collective thinking of this, call it the senior management team or the top 20 officers of an organization, or of the top 20 people of a function, is important in determining that prioritization. So
Okay.
to a large extent, what I've gone through is it's more intuitive. It's not like utilizing a scoring mechanism, although typically what I use is really what sometimes people call a shirt size, small, medium, and large. Is that trying to prioritize risks in terms of something more than three, or five, becomes almost not that effective. So
Yeah.
I would just underscore is that there is an intuitive element to this in terms of determining impact and likelihood.
Okay. Yeah, and there are many practices in corporation, different applications of this. Usually they end up in a matrix, right, where impact and likelihood have the same effect in the matrix. Each one is an axis of the matrix, and the cross section of both is what the is what is defined as risk to be prioritized, right? Going to the next question, I think it's going to be, unfortunately, the last one. How can I help top management to really manage risk instead of manipulating the process to create projects that are not helping in the reduction of risk? So I think I can start answering this one, John. Um, when things are how did we say it before based on the question, intuitive, right? um when everything is intuitive and not very comprehensive, um it gives space for people to put in their hidden agendas, right? And put in project they actually want to do, but not necessarily would be the recommended project for that risk, and so on. So the more transparency you have, and the more, um the less intuitive. That wasn't the term. Oh yeah, intuitive approach. I'm looking at the comments here. The less intuitive approach you have, the less space you have for this kind of manipulation of, risk management within the companies.
Just adding to that, as I mentioned about the risk factors, the politics, is life is political. And when you're debating these risks across a group and the impact, is that the strongest voice generally seems to get the most airtime. Is that what's really important in this process, and I've mentioned this to CEOs as we execute this, is that I generally get a sense for who is going to be the strongest voice in helping to counterbalance that strongest voice to make sure that just that individual's intuition is not overly weighted in the whole
Yeah.
process. So
Okay.
I agree with you, Guilherme, but I also think that you just have to deal with the politics of people as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're reaching the end of our event here. I'd like again to thank you, John, very much. A few reminders. We recorded this event, so if you're going to get an email with the link for the recording if you want to share with someone. If you want a certificate of attendance, please fill in the form that you'll find here in the chat, right? And our next risk management focused event will happen September 10th. Risk and return, how to drive corporate performance balancing risks, right? So the connection of performance, corporate performance, and risks, how these things coexist and connect to each other, right? Please, if you're interested, there's on screen here QR code for you to register to the next event. And if also you can click on the link on the chat as well to register for the next event. And if you wish to connect with us directly, our contacts are here on the chat as well. Thank you very much, and I hope we'll see you on September 10th again. And thank you, John. Very rich your sharing of experience here with us.
Enjoy the conversation. Take care.
Thanks.